today's video, I'm sharing 26 hacks for you to take into 2026 DIYing with Mod Podge. For this Mod Podge hack, you can use any surface really. Wood, glass, doesn't matter. I'm going to be using this, and we're going to be creating mica powder paint. I use mica powder all the time in my content, and I forget to talk about this often. I'm like, as I'm thinking about this Mod Podge video, I'm like, this is definitely a hack. It is definitely a way for people to get more creative, more unique, mixing different things. And what I love so much about this is it really sticks to any surface. I have used this on mirrors, I've used this on furniture, I've used this on regular wood, all kinds of things. The mica powder bonds so well to the Mod Podge, and it creates stunning, unique, with a little bit of like a shine to it look. And people, this mica powder is really inexpensive. I picked these up from Amazon, and I only picked them up because they were like the cheapest thing that they had. Don't start me lying to you. There was nothing special about the mica powder. It was cheap, so I purchased it. Now, to get started, you're just going to take some Mod Podge and mix it up. I decided to just use one plate, plop 3 different little sections of Mod Podge, and then I took my mica powder and I just tappity tap 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 it right on into our Mod Podge. Now, be mindful, because this stuff, no. See what happens when you get cocky with your tappiness? Eventually karma comes back to smack you like, nah, you're not that great. Anyhow, be careful. It's messy on its own, and if you over tap, it definitely makes a huge mess. And then mix it up. This is going to take a little bit of patience. It probably took me a good 10 minutes to mix the 3 of these together, because the mica powder is super, super fine. I just cut up a piece of sponge for this. You could absolutely ball up a tissue or a piece of paper towel. I've done that before. Just be mindful if it sheds. You could use a little coral sponge or a regular pouncer. Any of that would work. I don't recommend using a paintbrush for this, but you do you. Don't let me tell you how to craft. Because I want to create an ombre look, I'm starting with the darkest color first at the bottom. And I did 2 layers on these without blending anything, and I let them dry. Of course, it's all sped up, so you guys don't see all that extra. But you can see we have the silvery white on the top and then the black on the bottom. And if you were using paint, I would tell you to have a paintbrush or a sponge, whichever you would be using at that point, that doesn't have anything on it to blend. But because we're using mica powder, this stuff is really thick, and it also gives a little bit of a texture. You're going to just alternate your sponges and go over the lines where they kind of meet each other, and just take your time with this. It's a really soothing, satisfying craft in my opinion, and I could just create stuff like this all day long. I just really enjoy the process. And going back and forth, you just get this beautiful blended look. Just take your time and then move the color up, and then take your lighter color and then go over the darker color, and you're just going to have such a cohesive appearance with the piece. And I do want to say that if you're going to do this on wood, let me know in the comments below if you want to see more with this type of stuff in the content. I will put DIYs in other Friday videos with different ways to be able to use mica powder as paint, and I'll show you different ways we can use it even with paintbrushes on different types of surfaces. I love this so much, and I think this would also look amazing with some candle wax in there and some little potpourri pieces at the top, just like a little decorative aspect of it. I really love how this turned out. Pottery Barn had these beautiful mosaic crackle pieces, but the price tag was a little hefty. I thought we could recreate these, not exactly, but an inspired piece using some of these candle holders from Dollar Tree. And we're going to start this off by using one of the most difficult mediums to work with, in my opinion, is Crackle. This is my favorite. There's a multitude of opinions. You're welcome to yours. I've tried many over the years. Again, this is my favorite. And I already know what you're thinking. The answer is probably yes. So save yourself the comment, okay? We're going to need a paintbrush. to spread our medium on here. You can absolutely use a sponge, whatever you would like. This is just the way I like to apply this medium. And I put a thin layer all over the place, mostly because this stuff already takes long enough to dry on its own. I don't heat gun it. I don't quick dry it. I allow this to dry naturally. And if I do a thick layer of it, it takes longer to dry, and I'm impatient. You know what I'm saying? We got things to craft. I chose white as the top layer for this. I wasn't sure how I was going to go about creating the design, if I wanted to grab a napkin and decoupage it on here just yet. I had a vision, but at the time I was like, I can probably blend white with anything with this design. So that's what I went with. I do want to tell you, for anyone that goes to apply this onto anything and then paint over it, it has an attitude, my friends. You want to have enough paint on your brush to just kind of do one swipey swipe, because it will pull the medium and then you will just have strips of blank stuff and it will be frustrating. So keep that in mind as you're using this Crackle medium. And if you wonder if you're doing it wrong, nope, it has an attitude. It is the medium itself. But if you have enough loaded on your brush, you'll get a decent coverage, and then that Crackle will just blend on in. Took me years working with this to get to a point where I actually have a comfort level enough, and I know in the spots that I'm looking to accomplish certain things. And then I like to now grab the heat gun. It makes the cracks even bigger. And I learned this trick from Sammy over at Unicorn Dust Designs. You hold that heat gun all over everything and it kind of expands the crackle a bit. And then any gaps or any splotches I noticed that is kind of like missing, or sections, splotches, whatever you want to call it, that's missing paint, I'll grab my paintbrush and do like a light dry brushing, not to mess up the entire crackle effect. I decided to grab my TDS Dry Rub On transfers. These are actually available in my sample sets, and I wanted to take some of the floral pieces and some of the butterflies and just rub them around the piece. Now, if you go to use transfers over top of paint, for sure, people, make sure that your paint is completely dry, like next day dry, okay? Not an hour dry. Or seal over it and then apply the transfer. It's possible the transfer can pop the paint up. I just allowed these to dry overnight and then came in and put the transfers where I felt they made sense. Once I was happy with the amount of transfers I had on our piece, I then grabbed our glossy Mod Podge. This is going to give us that shine that those pretty Pottery Barn pieces had with the ceramic glaze. I applied 3 layers onto the top of this, allowing it to dry an hour in between, and I think these turned out really pretty. A very trendy thing going on in the crafty world right now with Mod Podge is called the Mod Podge swirl method. You're able to get these faux stained, faux frosted glass looks by swirling Mod Podge on the back of some glass. It's been my experience that finding the floating frames with 2 pieces of glass gives some of the best results. You can pick these up at Dollar Tree, Walmart, you know, they got them laying around. So I'm just going to leave the front of the glass inside of our piece here, and I'm going to take the back part out. We're going to use a little bit of alcohol to get any excess off of this, just clean our glass up. And recently I've been told, because I've made a bunch of these videos, I'll link them down in the description box for you, that putting black behind the glass is going to give you guys a better view. So to those of you that have been suggesting that, here we go. Let me know in the comments below if you enjoy this view better versus the white background. To get started, pick your stickers, pick your stencil, pick your transfers, whatever you want to do. I've done a multitude of things here. They all yield pretty great results. I'm using some Temu stickers here, and I'm just going to rub them right on the front. I happen to like the stickers because they just give me a quick result, and I thought these were really nice looking. I'm now going to just kind of flip that little piece right on over and clean the back of the glass. You're going to need glossy Mod Podge for this. I've tried mixing matte and glossy, and I've tried just matte, and I definitely get the best result using glossy Mod Podge for this. Pour a little bit out on a plate or wherever, take 2 fingers and then just start swirling, and you just do this all over the back of the piece. If you're happy with those results once they've dried, and this is going to take anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour, it really just depends on how thick. I wouldn't go in too heavy. The thicker it is, there's more of a chance of bubbles, and some people don't like the bubbles. If the bubbles don't bother you, then by all means go ham with how thick you're applying this. And here's the first layer, and I thought this actually turned out really beautiful, but from experience, I know putting that second layer on there is just going to elevate that swirl a little bit more and give you a little bit more of depth to your piece. So I did another layer, and it is always a little hard to see, but I tried to give several different angles here so you guys could really get in on it. I absolutely love these pieces and making these projects. I have several videos with this down in the description box if you're interested in seeing more. Next time you're in Dollar Tree, pick up some of their Dishwasher Safe Mod Podge. And for these amazing projects, we're going to be using it on some tiles. Now, if you don't have plain tiles, Dollar Tree does sell coasters that you can pick up and paint over for a clean slate for these DIY projects. However, if you got a Home Depot next to you, I would suggest stopping on over in their flooring section and grabbing some plain tiles for 13 cents each. I picked up 4 and only spent 55 cents. I mean, for extra footage, I picked up 4, but I had more. Listen, I got more towels. And you're going to want to stick around to the end of this video because we're going to be putting this stuff to the test. For this beautiful bathroom towel riser, we're going to be using 3 towels and need something to create that riser effect. And I'm just going to grab 2 of Dollar Tree's wood trays for this. To start off with this project, we're going to need a way to knock off that sheen on those towels. And at first, you might think sanding it down is a great idea. And you can absolutely do this. Don't let me stop you. However, it can be messy, and this can actually take a while sanding this stuff down. So I recommend grabbing a paint that is perfect for the surface that you plan on using this Dishwasher Safe Mod Podge on. Now, in the towel case, they're ceramic. So this multi-surface will work perfect with this, and I've used it many times on ceramic. And it's also really inexpensive. Another thing that you could use is some clear matte spray paint and give them a nice coat over top of the towels. But for this project, we're rolling on with this multi-surface and just tappity tap tap tapping all over the 3 of these until they are completely covered, and gonna let that dry. While those are drying, I'm going to take some of my Tight Bond quick and thick with a little bit of hot glue and attach these 2 small trays. The 3 of those towels fit perfectly right on the top of these. For the next portion, take this idea and use it to remix into what works best for your home decor. I personally would like to use my TDS Decoupage Paper that's called Musical Evergreen Botanicals and put on the top of these towels for the decoupage part. This is 18 by 24 inch tissue paper. It's super easy to work with. If anyone is interested, you can check out my website at thediystruggle.com. I have over 40 designs for you to choose from. But you can most certainly use whatever type of rice paper, decoupage paper, or napkins you would like for this project. Once everything was dry and I trimmed the tissue section down to size that I wanted to use, I took that Dishwasher Safe Mod Podge and put a nice, thick, healthy coat all over the top of the towels and let it dry. I also grabbed some parchment paper because we're going to need to bring on in the iron so we can iron these pieces onto our tiles. It's important before you do this to make sure that you let that Mod Podge completely dry, so this way it will reactivate underneath of whatever you're ironing it on and melt right onto the top of your projects. I like to start from one side, pulling tight, and smoothing out and work to the next. I just laid the 3 of these towels perfectly next to each other, so this way the design looked like one beautiful large piece. Then I flipped them upside down, grabbed an X-Acto knife, and cut the paper gingerly in between the pieces. Now that they're completely separated, I can take a little bit of sandpaper and just get all the excess off around the tiles. Again, take this idea and remix it to what works for your decor. I decided to just take a little bit of antique Waverly wax and stain the top of the boxes. Next, I used some tacky glue to make sure that these were going to stay in place and put our towels on the top. Then when you're happy with your placement, you grab your dishwasher safe Mod Podge and put a nice layer over your project. When I use this stuff, I like to do extremely thin layers, and I'll usually do about 3 of them. I made sure to put this all over the whole project since I'm keeping it next to the bathroom sink, so this way if I did get any water on the wood, it was also protected in addition to the tiles that I decoupaged. For this dishwasher safe Mod Podge coaster idea, we're going to leave the coaster just as it is and take a layer of the dishwasher safe Mod Podge and put a nice thin coat right over the top. It doesn't have to be really thick, just put a thin even layer over the whole towel. It took about 30 minutes for this to dry. You'll notice there are teeny tiny brush streaks on this. They're not horrible. They are slightly noticeable, but it's also not tacky because we didn't overload the Mod Podge. Now we're going to take some transfers and rub on the top of our coaster that we are creating. Feel free to use whatever transfers you would like for this idea. I'm using my own personal creative brand called TDS, which is short for the DIY Struggle, and you can find this beautiful 8x10 set called Harmony at the DIYstruggle.com for anyone that's interested. I took the coaster and traced it on the back side of one of the transfers and then just trimmed down the section that I wanted to apply onto the top of the towel. And people, I'm not just saying this because they're my transfers. I'm just trying to be real with you. They're super tacky. So you're going to get one shot at this. Oh no! Yep, so I had to go do a whole nother prepping for another tile, cut a whole new transfer, and then gingerly make sure I was holding onto that sucker with both hands nice and tight before applying it onto the tile. So be careful when you're doing this at home. If you go to use transfers, it's not always the most forgiving thing. However, it's so worth it because look how beautiful the transfers turn out once they're onto the tile. Now you're just going to take some of that dishwasher safe Mod Podge and apply a very thin layer all over the piece. Now I put 3 layers all over this little transfer after it dried. It took me a whole day, if I'm being completely honest, to make sure that I was just applying thin layers. It minimizes the streaks that you can see sometimes using Mod Podge. I know people complain about that, but this is a little trick to have minimal brush strokes. And another little tip that I learned recently and have been testing out, and I'm pretty sure I got it from my TDS community over on Facebook. If you guys aren't hanging out with us over there, it's an amazing little community. I'm pretty sure I keep the link down in the description box, or it's on the community tab, is to take some parchment paper and your iron and go over top of the whole piece. So once you've applied the last layer of Mod Podge, and in my case, like I said, I do real thin layers, at least 3 on pieces like this, let it dry, and then I came back the whole next day and did this, and people, it minimized the brush strokes even more. This is an absolute game changer if you struggle with that. Such a great tip. There are many different ways that you can finish up the bottom of a coaster. I decided to take some of this adhesive cork sheet from Dollar Tree, just trace it and cut it down to size and apply on the bottom. I did add a little bit of tacky glue for some extra insurance that it wasn't going to go popping back off. And that's going to be it for this beautiful coaster. For this dishwasher safe Mod Podge coaster set, we're going to be decoupaging some napkins onto these. But first we're going to knock off that sheen by just taking some of DIY's paint and putting a nice coat over the top and allowing it to dry. So we have a nice, not shiny or slick surface to give us a good start for our decoupage. I'm pretty sure this is the last of this napkin that I have in my stash, but why I love it so much is it's one that has 4 designs on it. So like I can get 4 projects out this sucker for the price of 1 napkin, you know what I'm saying? So I just cut out the little piece that I wanted to decoupage onto the towel, and I'm going to put the rest of it away. Back into my stash in case I need to call upon this napkin one day. Next, I'm just removing any of the sneaky layers on the back because we only need the top decorative layer to put onto the top of the tile. There's many different ways that you can do this. One of my favorites is just to tear a corner, and it usually reveals the sneaky little layers, and I can just pull them right off. Now we're just going to take a nice thick layer of that dishwasher safe Mod Podge and apply it all over our towels and allow it to dry. Once it's dry, grab some parchment paper, bring on in the iron, and start from one side of the tile and work your way all the way to the other side, slowly ironing on the napkin to the tile. When you're done, use some sandpaper to remove any of the excess, and then grab the dishwasher safe Mod Podge and put a nice thin layer over the napkin. But a little tip, I like to allow my pieces to dry at least 24 hours before applying the first thin top layer of the sealer. So keep that in mind. And for these particular pieces, I applied 3 complete coats, allowing them to dry in between applications. Now that we finished the projects, let's test this dishwasher safe Mod Podge. In full disclosure, if you check out the directions, it does say allow this stuff 28 days to completely cure. With the exception of that one specific direction, I only waited 24 hours. We followed the rest as far as the application, how many times, and the drying times go. And being completely transparent, I have used this stuff before. I've waited for the 28-day cure time, and yes, I've put a cup in the dishwasher on the top rack and did a cycle, and it was fine. For this demonstration, I wanted to show you that the very next day, setting this piece next to the sink with just some droplets of water, letting it sit for a couple minutes, there isn't even any welting going on, not even on the wood. And if you have not used regular Mod Podge before, decoupaged over top of it, if you get some water on the top of it and it hasn't completely cured, they'll be like, it will start to turn colors. I'm not sure how to explain it. This, however, does not have any of that, and you can wipe it right off and it's not tacky to the touch. For this next part, I wanted to take the other 2 tiles and just spray them with some of this Dawn dishwashing liquid. Absolutely, you could do this with regular hand soap if you want. This is just what I had on hand, so that's why I'm using it. And I'm dousing it completely underneath of the sink faucet and just rubbing that water into here. And you can see it's completely saturated all over the towel, and I'm still rubbing it in there really well, giving it another nice soak. And then I'm just going to take a little rag and just dry the piece off. You'll notice there's no discoloration, but the one thing that I really think is cool, even 24 hours later, that stands out to me is wetting this product and wiping it off like this. You can see the rag is like smoothly going over it. It's not tacky. So the way you apply this stuff, doing thin layers, letting it dry in between, it really makes a difference. I applied the same exact test to the tile that I had the napkin on. And for this one, I decided to really just smear that soap right into the top of here. Give it a nice lathering before I ran it underneath of the sink. And people, keep in mind, this little test, this little demonstration here is not for me to say, don't listen to the directions. Absolutely listen to the recommended directions on the bottle of waiting for it to cure 28 days. I just wanted to share with you my experience of how great this stuff works, even 24 hours later. If you were to put it out and there gets a little bit of water on there, you have plenty of time to wipe it off and your project will not get ruined. Pottery Barn had the most beautiful high-end artesian rope vase, and I knew we could recreate this for a tiny fraction of the cost using some of the glassware from Dollar Tree and a nautical rope. For this part, we're going to grab some hard coat Mod Podge. I have done a lot of glass art, and one thing that I can tell you, if you're going to put a fabric or a material on the glass, you need to make sure that the medium you're using is going to create that hard locked surface between the glass and the material. And this stuff works pretty amazingly. The rope is also thick, okay? So we're going to add a little bit of water to that hard coat and allow it to soak up into that rope. We need to get it really saturated so once we attach it onto the glass, it's not going to move around. And then we're going to allow this to dry onto our piece. And I mean, people squeeze it. Make sure, if you don't think that your material has enough of the medium in there, by all means, add a little bit more. This is going to matter whenever you're working with glass and you're trying to apply fabric onto there. You want to make sure that when you put that final seal over top of everything, that it's not going to go falling apart later. So making sure that the material is really soaked with whatever you're applying it on there is going to help the longevity of your project. Once I made sure every drop was in that rope, I then just created my design. And you can be really free with this. It does not dry instantly. As a matter of fact, this is going to have to dry overnight. You're going to want to make sure that that rope is completely solid before you go on to the next step. And I will tell you that I also feel like it's best when you're doing a material like this, if you take some more of your medium, you could use tacky glue. Tacky glue works really well for me also. And fabric Mod Podge, I like that stuff too. And come in with a paintbrush and touch up any sections that you feel could be a problem that material would break off of the glass. Now, since this rope had little gaps in it, I took my paintbrush and took my time and went around with hard coat around the entire line of the rope where it touched the glass and allowed this to sit and completely dry before coming back the next day. And I did a little tappity tap 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 so you guys could see just how much this stuff hardened and how you want yours to sound before you move on to the next step. For our textured surface, I'm going to be using some of DIY's paint and mixing it with some calcium carbonate. This is the plaster color, and people, I gotta tell you, my hand grip strength is not doing well. I got it. I get asked often, what is calcium carbonate? It's really just a supplement. You can pick this up off Amazon. That's where I got mine at. I do love how it adds some texture in with my paints. You could use baking soda or whatever floats your boat for this. This is just my go-to. I like the way that it comes out. Make sure you mix it up really well, because if not, you'll have little poofs of that powder as your paint is drying, and you want to make sure that you don't have those little joints. I took a sponge and tappity tap tap tapped 2 layers all over our piece. In the Dollar Tree Plus section where their candles are, they have these gorgeous, large, white, unscented candles for just $3, which personally I feel like was a steal because on a recent trip to Goodwill, I found this dirty, crusty joint for $3.99. I mean, eventually it looked like this, but I put a lot of work in for an extra $1. For that upcycle, I used a napkin, and today we're going to use a piece of TDS Decoupage tissue paper. This print is so pretty, and if you are wanting to transform a candle and create some unique decorative decor for your home, adding some tissue paper to candle wax can really give you that effect. I like to leave a little bit of overhang with my material just to make room for mistakes. I'm using some good old Mod Podge for our medium. Feel free to use whatever medium works for you. And then I just go section by section, applying the roll and rub on method with my tissue paper and a piece of parchment paper. You could absolutely grab you a piece of cling wrap, whatever works best for you when you're applying your decoupage. I do like to use a medium whenever I'm applying tissue paper to a candle. I feel like the results are always better, and I don't plan on burning this. It's decorative, so in the event that you're wondering if you can burn this, I don't recommend that because it has Mod Podge on it. If you're looking for a technique that would allow that, taking a heat gun and melting a napkin in is a better way to get that result. It's just been my experience that if you're not using tissue paper that's as porous as a napkin, which this is not, it is 18-pound tissue paper, so it's porous but not as porous as a napkin, you're not going to get that melted smooth connection that a heat gun provides you. And for anyone looking for how to do that technique, I can put a link for that upcycle video down in the description box, which is where you'll also find a link to the DIYstruggle.com where you can check out this beautiful TDS decoupage tissue paper. I was recently asked if I had any recommendations for an X-Acto knife. I struggle with hand grip strength issues, and I know so many of you do too, and surprisingly, I didn't. So I picked this up from Amazon and I've been testing it out. Now, I can't say it's necessarily a go-to just yet, but I do appreciate how thick the handle is, and this was really easy to switch the blades in and out. And it did an absolutely stunning job to finish off the top of this gorgeous Dollar Tree DIY candle home decor piece. For this Mod Podge hack, grab yourself a bowl or something you like the shape of and feel you can mold onto it. And then give it a couple taps on the booty. I don't know what's wrong with me. I'm sorry. I just ruined a perfectly good entrance moment. Let's do that again. Next, you're going to want to bring in the parchment paper. Or do you? We're going to get there. I'm going to explain that in just a second. And I'll take any information you guys want to dish out with me with that as well. You're going to need some water. And we're using this hard coat by Mod Podge, okay? Normally, I do a lot of glass art, and you can use fabric and you can manipulate it. One of my favorite ways is to use tacky glue. But I recently discovered this hard coat by Mod Podge. You can use Mod Podge as well, but it's not going to get as stiff as this stuff. And Mod Podge actually has Stiffy to help stiffen up. Sorry. I can hear my mom now as I'm walking into the craft section. Like, what do you need today? I gotta go buy some Stiffy, Mom. I'm sorry. I can make an inappropriate joke. I don't miss anything. But it really is a product. It stiffens your fabric. So what I was saying about the wax paper or parchment paper is that I struggled to get the tape to even stick to it. You know how like nothing's supposed to stick to this stuff? Not even the tape was sticking to it. So I just kind of flipped it over and prayed, you know. I poured a healthy amount into about a 1/4 cup of water and then mixed this stuff on up to get a really nice consistency. If it's too thick, it's not going to really smoosh into your fabric. It's been my experience, or whatever you're trying to attach onto anything. I struggle with that when you leave your mediums really thick, so watering them down just a little bit allows some play and some absorption, especially when you're using a fabric. To start this off, and you can do this however you want, but I do recommend starting off on the bottom, creating like that base section on the very bottom, and then taking your pieces and attaching to the bottom. This way, when you're all done, you can take one more piece and attach it over the bottom, and it kind of smushes all the pieces together that you put around the piece you attached on the bottom. You'll see how I'm doing it here, and it just gives a good end result. In my opinion, it just kind of holds everything together a little bit better. And you can do this with all kinds of stuff. You can do this with just strips of fabric. You could do this with the little, you know, Dollar Tree leaves. You can do this with florals. It's just going to take a little bit of patience, especially because you're creating a bowl. So you're going to want to also let this sit for a full 24 hours. So the form takes shape. And I will tell you, people, feel free if you want to put color in here. It will color the burlap as you're doing this, so it comes out a different color. Or if you want to wait until this is completely dry and then paint it, you could put some stencils on here and then just seal right on over it. So here is me taking another little square after I'm happy with the shape of my little bowl I've created here, and I'm just putting it over all the pieces that are connected right to the bottom of our bowl in the center here. And then I decided it needed something else. So I grabbed some of this. I never know what it is, but it really just kind of looks like mesh and coral all at the same time to me from Dollar Tree. I wanted to create just like a little, you know, decorative piece on our bowl here. So I cut this thinner, dunked it on in our little mixture, and then wrapped it right on around the center of the bowl. And then I let this sucker dry at 24 hours. And I'm gonna go live for you here real quick, people, because I want you to actually hear this as I'm doing it. This, like I said, it's 24 hours later. Watch this. Like, this sucker is hard, okay? Like, it is ridiculous how hard this thing is. You can beat it on the wall and it is just not falling apart. So you want to create something, that Mod Podge, that hardening Mod Podge is absolutely ridiculous. This bowl turned out super flipping cute. There are about 3 different Mod Podge hacks going on in this one project. I'm going to use this 14 by 14 t-shirt frame because this is the type of glass I wanted. I'm keeping this piece, but you use whatever you want to use and use any of these ideas. Now, one is going to be something that I'm pretty sure a lot of people have seen, where you can use Mod Podge to create a fake stain look on the glass. This piece of glass was really wiggly in here, and I decided to take some Gorilla Glue gel and glue the sucker to the frame so I didn't have to worry about it moving. And no, I'm not entrusting hot glue with that job, okay? It should go without saying that you need to clean your glass, all right? I'm just using some alcohol here on a towel and wiping this down, or a little paper towel, I should say, and wiping this down. Next, we're gonna bring in our stencil. Now you can use whatever kind of stencil you want. I've been holding on to this lion for quite some time. I knew I wanted to use that for this particular project, and I was waiting for my next Mod Podge hack video for it. Now I'm going to flip my frame over and tape this onto the bottom where I want the piece to come through on the opposite side of the glass. And some of you may have seen this where people take puffy paint and they trace a stencil or they paint a design using puffy paint, and then they'll mix some of Mod Podge with some acrylic paint, creating the fake stained glass look, which we're going to get to. But first, let's talk about this hack. You're going to need some squeeze bottles. This was technically the only one I had. I wanted to do several, but I didn't have enough time to wait for Amazon to deliver me more squeeze bottles. So we're going to use this one and get the point across. Take your Mod Podge and put it inside a squeeze bottle. Then grab you some acrylic paint, whatever color you want, and squeeze it in there until you're happy with the way that that color is blending in with your Mod Podge. And then grab you some mica powder and then put it inside of the bottle. Make sure it's in frame because I'm not in frame here. And then shake it on up. You're gonna have a nice mixture and your paint is gonna have an awesome looking color. And the fun thing about this, for whatever reason, I don't know why it works, is this will come out like puffy paint. See how it's going on here, just like this? It's going to stay just like that. It's going to not lose the 3D puffiness, maybe just a little bit as it dries, but not a whole lot. And the best part is this also doesn't really bleed and go anywhere from other than where you're squeezing it. I'm taking the back of a paintbrush here just to kind of pull this DIY puffy paint around his little mane. So this is kind of two hacks in one. One, for whatever reason, the mica powder and the Mod Podge and the paint, it creates an awesome texture that gives a raised level to this as it dries. And then two, your paint, if you look at the mica powder and as this dries, you see it, it's going to have this beautiful shimmery look to it. It just looks amazing. I took the mixture in the bottle and I just basically used for the entire main part, and then to create the other colors, since I didn't have any more squeeze bottles, and if I did I would have did the same thing, I just used Mod Podge and acrylic paint. And you'll be able to see in the reveal that just the Mod Podge and the acrylic paint alone do not create as much of a puffy layer as adding that mica powder. Like I said, for whatever reason, the mica powder just allows it like a textured 3D appearance. I mean, there's a noticeable difference that it's a little bit raised, but it's not as raised. I hope that makes sense. Plus, the color is really cool when you add the mica powder. Now, I know what some of you are probably thinking, Brandy, why not just use puffy paint? To be honest with you, I don't really like using puffy paint because it takes too long to dry and I'm impatient. This whole project that you're watching me make here, it took me 45 minutes. Not kidding, 45 minutes. Like, it dried pretty much as I went, even the thick sections. You could use a dotting tool for this part, but I wanted something a little bit thicker to make the ends kind of stand out, and just use the end of one of my crusty bit paintbrushes to trace on all the extra pieces that belong to our lion here. The best part about making pieces like this is as you're coming to an end, you can see it really start to come alive. And working with glass, you can really bend colors. So that's why it's so awesome creating fake stained art, because you can blend it in different ways, different shades, especially when you're hanging something on the wall or if you're putting it in the window, and it will give you different looks. So I just added a little bit of water to the colors that I already had on here. So this way it was extremely translucent and just shaded in different little sections. If you have these laying around your house and you're not really sure what to do with them, try turning them into a little photo stand holder by putting them on top of each other just like this. Now we're going to decoupage around the edges. If I'm being 100, I didn't have the smaller size blocks, so I took myself to Home Depot and I grabbed the smaller one. I did have the larger one in my stash, but while I was there, I also may have grabbed more than I really needed. We won't talk about that. Moving on, for our rice paper, we're going to be using my TDS Creative Rice Paper print, and we're going to cut off a little section right up at the top. I really thought that this part would match the natural color of the wood and decided to trim it down as precise as possible. Now, if you wanted to leave it whole and then completely sand off all the sections at the end, that's completely up to you. There's a multitude of different ways you can go about tackling this. For me, I just wanted to trim it as close as I could to the edges, so I didn't have a ton of sanding in the ends. For our medium, I decided to go with some good old Mod Podge. Feel free to use whatever medium you would like for your project. This is just what I decided to go with. And I'm going to be using my TDS Creative Artist Brush in the fan style for our application. Just went around the edges, and I did 2 at a time and wet the back of our rice paper just a little bit. You could absolutely leave the rice paper dry if you would like. It's completely up to you. And I gingerly pressed our strips around the edges of our little wood blocks here. And then I continued to do the same application process for the larger block and allowed these to dry. I did notice that there was still a little bit of overhang with the rice paper and decided to bring on in the finger sander and give them a nice little shave down so the rice paper was completely flush with the end of the wood around the edges. To attach the pieces, I'm going to use Type-On Quick and Thick and some hot glue. Now I just kind of spread the Quick and Thick out over the majority of the wood, since that's going to give us our long hold, and then kept just a tiny little space open where I could get that hot glue in there so we could get an immediate hold to attach the pieces while that Quick and Thick dry. Mind my big old head in the way. I wanted to make sure it was like exactly centered. I did pretty good. When the piece was dry, I grabbed my Folk Art varnish and gave the piece a nice coat. This way it was completely sealed and everything looked really nice and cohesive and melted together. I did have to allow this to dry before bringing on in our drill with our drill bit. Now, I recommend using a decent sized drill bit for this next part, depending on what you're going to put in there for your photo stand. So you can see mine's pretty thick and chunky. I'm going to be taking some metal gauge wire in here, and I wanted the space. So I took a minute and drilled. Now, mind you, be careful doing this, okay? Because your piece is going to move. If you want to clamp it down, you go right ahead. But once the hole was in there, I then grabbed some wire cutters and I grabbed some needle nose pliers along with our wire. Now, I get this off of Amazon, okay? It's just manipulable gauge wire. You can, whatever you would like, use what you could use, you know, a little paper clip if you want. I take this stuff and I patiently curl it around to create the ability for us to place a photo in the top. And then when I'm happy with the circle, and it never is a perfect circle. It is literally like, it's a wonky circle. I like it, okay? I like it. And then I curve the bottom and shove that sucker in the hole. I usually do not glue anything down, but I did feel like there was a little disconnect here, so I shoved some messy moss in there to cover up the bottom of it, and put a beautiful photo in here to finish our piece off. For this little riser, we're going to be taking one of Dollar Tree's scrap wood pieces and doing a napkin iron-on decoupage method to it with the natural wood. You can absolutely paint your piece up if you want. Your napkin design will pop more, but I love sharing how you can use pieces in their natural state to look like it's blended into the wood. To get started, go ahead and throw a nice healthy layer of Mod Podge all over your piece of wood. When it looks like this, set it off to the side to dry naturally for a couple hours. Then pick your napkin, my friends, and you're going to need to get that top decorative layer away from that sneaky underneath layer. There are several different ways to remove your napkins. One of the easiest is just to tear a corner. Usually it reveals the sneaky under layer and I can just pull them right apart. Now it's time to bring in the iron, and make sure to grab you some parchment paper. You're going to want to put that right over top of your napkin. Pick an end and slowly push the iron back and forth, moving from one side to the next. This is just going to help push any possible bubbling or wrinkling all the way to the other side. So instead of going all around the edges and then coming back to the middle and possibly having some bubbles, it just eliminates that. Before you start removing the excess napkin, just go around the edges and make sure it's all completely attached. I'm just taking my finger sander and going straight down to pull all the excess napkin off. Now I want to round off those edges. This is going to really allow that napkin to completely look blended into that piece of wood. And I do not recommend doing this if your napkin is not completely on your piece of wood. It is going to just ruin your piece. For the legs of this little riser, I'm just going to be using some of Dollar Tree's little Christmas trees. Use whatever you would like for your legs. I'm also going to be creating a smidge of an ombre look with some antique Waverly wax so that the bottom is slightly darker as it blends to the top. Just a cool little aesthetic accent to this piece. And then I'm taking some tacky glue and attaching all of them to the bottom. I allowed this piece to dry completely overnight and then came back in with some of Mod Podge's hard coat. This stuff is water resistant, so in the event if we want to put it in the bathroom or the kitchen, we are protected. And a good tip to help reduce any further wrinkling, even after this is dry, apply your sealer in thin layers. We're going to need some glossy Mod Podge for this DIY Mod Podge hack. And the reason for the glossy over the mat is look at this ceramic candle holder here. It's glossy. We're going to keep most of the piece just like it is and add a little bit of accent to the bottom. See the ridges? They're going to help us create an ombre effect using the color we already have without actually creating an ombre effect. Don't be confused, let me explain. These are two Dollar Tree pieces. I took my mica powder paint mixture, I love to call it, and created an ombre effect. I had several people say that they struggle blending and they have a hard time creating ombre. So I want to show you an idea of how you can get a look like this without needing to use two colors. And finding a piece that has little raised areas or rigid pieces like this is really going to help increase that effect easily. First, you're going to need to decide which color mica powder you need, and today I've decided to go with black. And people don't start questioning me about the ratio and saying, Brandy, how much to how much? Listen, mix with love, my friends, mix with love. I'm gonna say I do a tappity tap of the mica powder and about a tablespoon of Mod Podge, okay? And then whatever that is. If you think you need some more, add some more. The more mica powder color or pigment you have in here, the deeper and more rich it will be versus, you know, the less, it'll be less. I'm going to use a pouncer for this, but feel free to use whatever works best for you. Glass, I like to use like a pouncer or cut up little piece of sponge. Just helps best if I tappity tap 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 on that sucker versus, you know, swiping with a paintbrush. It leaves stripes. I'm not a huge fan of that, but I don't mind doing a paintbrush at the end to smooth it out, but ceramic and glass and smooth surfaces that I'm not prepping, it works best for me. See how we're starting at the bottom and just gingerly working our way up? This is super easy. It literally took me just a few minutes to do, and this stuff dries really, really quickly. You can obviously make the bottom as thick as you want. And then when you're ready to start creating that ombre effect where it's blending into the whites, you start gently tapping up the sides of just the ridges. Then you'll see that you have that white blending into the black towards the bottom on the sides that are more dented in and not the ones that are popping out. Once this is dry, if you want to completely go over it with a clear gloss just so everything looks extremely blended, you can go right ahead, but I didn't on here, so you could see that it looks just fine just like this. to be decoupaging on metal, it's important that we use a paint to prime our piece that we know is going to stick to that material really well. If you don't have access to a DIY retailer, here are two other options I have used many times that I can pick up from Walmart, and the folk art I can usually grab from Hobby Lobby if you have one of those local to you as well. For this project, I decided to go with this because I know it works really well against metal, and if you're ever interested in trying out some DIY paint or looking for a retailer, my friend Sammy at Unicorn Dust Designs sells it. I usually keep a link down in the description box. And on a side note, people, look at the size of this pouncer I had in my stash. It took me just a couple minutes to get the first coat on this pizza pan. Whenever I'm painting on metal or glass, I always like to use a pouncer or a sponge. And then I tappity tap 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 the product all over our project. And usually it takes 1 or 2 coats and I get a really nice coverage instead of painting it. And a quick little tip I want to share with you, this works for glass or metal. You want to take your finger and scrape along the paint, making sure it is attached before you start decoupaging anything. If you notice with those tiny little scrapes that your paint is coming up, your Mod Podge is probably not going to stick to the surface as you're decoupaging. You're going to have some separation. So do one of two things. Apply another layer of the paint that you're using and allow that to dry, or switch up the paint because the paint you're using might not be made for that surface. And in some cases, it also might not be fully dry. In worst case scenario, you absolutely do not have access to the paint. You can use Rust-Oleum Clear Matte spray paint, seal over it, let it dry. That has worked for me in a pinch, but brushing on sealers with paint that doesn't stick to those materials can be tricky, so just be careful. How about this napkin, people? Isn't it pretty? This was sent to me by a subscriber. Thank you so much. I am so excited to be using this on our pizza pan, and yes, it fits perfectly, but we got to trim it down to size. And there are so many ways to do this, but for this particular project, I'm just going to flip the napkin on the back side so we have a nice clear visual of where the pencil marks are going to be. I decided I am going to keep this very clean cut and I'm not going to add anything around the border, so I want this as precise and as perfect as I can get it. I made sure to hold my one hand and my arm kind of over the napkin as much as I could so it didn't move around while I was doing this. Then when I was happy with the circle I made, I tore a little corner to reveal the top decorative layer and then sectioned it enough apart that it went over the piece that we're going to be pulling apart before I started cutting. And then I just cut the entire circle out and peeled the top layer off. I was worried that if I waited to pull the sneaky layer off the back after I trimmed this down that I might have ruined a side, and I needed it perfect. And I needed to leave that extra ply on there so I could see the pencil mark. I didn't want to pencil the back of the decorative layer because the napkin was so dark. I knew I wasn't going to be able to see it to cut the perfect circle. For our application, I'm going to use a fan brush. This is just my go-to whenever I'm decoupaging a napkin. It just works best for me. By all means, use whatever you would like. I made sure the napkin was in the exact spot that I wanted it and then peeled a section back. I applied a little bit of Mod Podge and then started spreading out a very small section. There are a ton of ways to decoupage and there are a lot of decoupage artists. I like to believe that the things that I share in my content, doing this for so long, are just things that work best for me, and I like to share them hoping they help you at home. And one way I found that really reduces your wrinkles on your napkin projects is to do a tiny bit of Mod Podge and then to press down your napkin gently over it. If you oversaturate your piece with a ton of Mod Podge, because I know it feels like you need a whole lot to get it to work, it's possible it's going to create wrinkles. But in the event that I do have too much Mod Podge in certain sections, I like to use a dry sponge. I usually get these in a pack from Walmart and I'll cut them down in size and just push down in the sections. This helps to absorb any extra Mod Podge that may be there into the sponge, and it also helps to flatten out your piece in the exact spot without smearing it back and forth. Sometimes when I use cling wrap, it will tear my napkin. Once your sponge gets all crusty, musty, sometimes after you've used it a bunch of times, you will notice it starts to get hard. The Mod Podge will harden it. I'll then cut that sucker up and reuse it to apply paint on different things. And then I just flip my napkin the opposite side of where I've applied it and continue the same method until I have a complete application. Now, while this is drying, you can take the opportunity to cut up your florals or paint any extra pieces that you want to attach to your pizza pan. If you want to put a layer of sealer over this, once it is all dry, you go right ahead before you apply on your florals and ribbons and things like that. This would also be perfect with a little hanger for you to hang on the wall or just leave it to sit around your home. For this Mod Podge hack, I'm going to be sharing how to use Mod Podge to prevent bleed through using a stencil. For our demonstration purposes, we're going to be remaking over this little, I think it's Dollar Tree. Let me know in the comments below if you actually know where it's from. I don't remember. I just seen it in my stash. I'm like, this will go great with my kitchen stencil I want to use for this project. To prep the piece, I just painted the whole thing with Waverly's black ink chalk paint. And then I went over it with a multi-surface white paint. Do this however you want or start fresh. I only applied 2 coats on here and that was just fine with me. Put as many coats as you need on your piece. We're going to just use regular matte Mod Podge, and you can use whatever Mod Podge you would like for your projects. As you can see here, this stencil is a little large, okay? And I love this stencil. I'm not cutting it down, so we're going to have to make it work. And I thought this would be perfect for this project for those of you that also don't want to cut down your stencils. As you can see here, even if I'm holding it down, there's some gapping. So it's always a good idea to grab your painter's tape and tape down your stencil if the project allows for it. Sometimes it doesn't. And real quick, I want to share this awesome find I picked up at Ross. My local Ross has a craft section and they have amazing deals. I grabbed this for $3.99. And if you're hanging out with me on my browsing channel, you already see me grab this. But for those of you that don't, I love sharing deals. So here's one. I personally like using fat synthetic brushes like this whenever I'm doing a Mod Podge application to prevent bleed through. It really helps control the amount of Mod Podge versus using a sponge or a pouncer, and it allows for thin applications, which here's the great reason for that. It dries super quick, people, super quick. I did 2 layers just to ensure that the Mod Podge was completely covering over the stencil. Now, if you don't want to do the Mod Podge method, you can absolutely take the same paint that you covered your piece with the base coat and go over your stencil doing the same thing. It's going to give you the same effect. In about 20 to 30 minutes, your piece should be dry. And if you pull it up to your face, you're gonna notice that all the little places that the stencil could be separated from your project, they're kind of all sealed in. I'm going to be using a pouncer for our application and apply the on-load, off-load method with it. And all that is taking a bunch of the paint that you plan on using on your stencil, getting it all nice and sopped up in whatever you're using as your applicator, and then tapping as much of it out until it's basically dry. And then start tapping on your stencil. This on its own is going to help reduce bleed through in addition to using this Mod Podge hack. So it's kind of a 2-for-1 there. And I don't know if you noticed my hand sneaking up in the corner to hold down the painter's tape that was popping up on me. Painter's tape was not trying to keep my stencil in place. It just wanted to keep popping up. Keep on-loading and off-loading your applicator as much as you need to. And don't be alarmed if your stencil sticks a little bit, because, you know, Mod Podge is sticky and it did seal it in together. I tried to get a really nice close-up and hold it still for you so you could see how amazing this works to cut down the bleed through. For this Mod Podge hack, I would recommend using wood with this. Now, I have this live edge wood that I get from a vendor at the same market that I'm a vendor at, and I cut these suckers on down we're going to need some book pages, or you could use some dictionary pages, or regular paper, but nothing glossy or satin or sheen, people, okay? We're going to use some water on a paintbrush to really trim down these pages to fit inside of our wood piece. And you can take this idea and remix it to whatever works for you, and you can get wood cut down at Home Depot or use a Dollar Tree wood piece. There's tons of wood pieces that you can take this idea and just do whatever type of DIY you want to do with it. But I personally say use wood because I just feel it's a little bit more forgiving whenever you're using a lot of like liquid on top of it than a glass or like a porcelain piece. When you're happy with the size you cut your paper down to, just decoupage them onto your piece and then pray this don't happen to you. What the hell is going on here? Oh my God, it's not coming out. I don't know why that grosses me out so much. It just reminds me of real boogers. I'm still over here gagging. Anyhow, you're going to want to just attach your paper down to your wood piece. And as you can see, I'm not necessarily carrying how much Mod Podge on here. I'm not doing it over wild, you know what I mean? Putting too much on, but paper is a whole different animal than napkin or tissue paper. And I'm even taking a little plastic tool here and squeegeeing it, pressing to the edge to squeeze out, well, if I can hold it in my hand, till I get the excess out at the edges. And then I just kind of grab the extra that puddles around the sides. This is just going to help keep your wrinkles down to a minimum. And usually paper is the easiest thing. If you're a beginner at decoupage, paper is going to be the go-to. You might have some little sections around the edges that are lifted and not completely sealed down. And that's fine, because our next part, our actual hack, is going to make sure that this paper is completely sealed down. I can't wait to share this piece with you, especially because I do decoupage art all the time. But this is just one that I love doing and using. You're going to need little bowls with a tiny bit of water in them for every color you plan on using. I'm using 3 for this, and to start out, we're going to do just like we would if we're going to make some stain art. We're going to water down our acrylic paint, and we only need a small amount. It took me a second here blending different colors because I was going for a certain blend here. I wanted to get really colorful with this piece. The reason you don't want to use any type of paper that is shiny or has a sheen is because it almost has a protective coating. So when you're going to do this hack and turn your paper different colors, it will prevent the Mod Podge and the paint and the water mixture from seeping in and actually creating the colored decoupage top layer. If you're one of the people that like to change the color of their papers and use coffees and teas, this is a really good way for you to skip all of that and just use a little bit of Mod Podge and add that to any color paint with a little bit of water, and you can change easily to anything you want. What is that? Why are you happening? Why is there Mod Podge boogers everywhere? I don't know what was wrong with this particular Mod Podge bottle, but anyhow, if you're going to ask me what ratio, people, I kind of wing it. And to be honest with you, I think I probably put about a tablespoon of Mod Podge in there because you want to make sure you have enough that when this starts to dry, it's going to seal over it. So when you're decoupaging a piece like this, and say you wanted to just add a little bit of brown with some tan and maybe some vanilla to create a vintage look, you can go right ahead and do that and just seal over the whole piece, and it's going to give you that effect. Now, obviously, you can get colorful like I am, and as long as you're making sure your brush is fairly dry when you're going about this, it's not going to rip your paper at all. Now you might be wondering to yourself, Brandy, why don't we just paint the thing? Well, you want to add the water because it dilutes it so you can actually see through the paint better. And then you want to add the Mod Podge because as it dries, it's going to seal the paper. Instead of you just having soggy, wet paper and then having to really wait for that to dry before you try to seal over it with a plain Mod Podge, This is going to give you more freedom and more durability with the paper because it will start to wear down in time. Especially if it's wet, it's dry, and you're trying to put colors on it, it's going to get saturated. It's a different consistency. And you'll notice as you're working with this that the actual mixture is a little thick. So as you're applying it, it's drying as I'm going because it has that Mod Podge in there. Now, obviously, you don't want to just do this to a piece of paper on its own because then the paper is just going to be nice and hard. That kind of came out wrong. Anyhow, you want to make sure that you're actually doing this on top of a piece like we did this wood, so that way it changes the color and seals it onto the piece all at the same time. If you want to just change the color of the paper, then use your normal coffee and tea DIY hack. We're going to take this stencil here and we're going to just make sure that it is applied on top of here really well. Also make sure that this is dry. It does not take long to dry. That's another awesome thing about coloring your paper. Does not take long. And then I'm putting a raised stencil on here. You could just do a regular stencil if you want, but I'm super in love with this Tim Holtz paste right now, so I'm using it every little opportunity that I get. Plus I do raised stencils a lot. And people, if you don't have a fancy schmancy spreading tool like I have here, just use a spoon, a plastic spoon, anything. It doesn't really matter. Use a tongue depressor or a popsicle stick, whatever you guys call it. Just spread it on there with whatever you have laying around. It doesn't have to be fancy schmancy. And then when you're happy with it, just pull it on up. There are so many different ways you can use the top layer to seal your Mod Podge to color paper and create different DIYs. I absolutely love using multicolors and raised stencils over wood pieces to make ones like this. For this decoupage pedestal stand, we're going to need to start off by grabbing us a Dollar Tree basket and one of these industrial candle holders. For the top of the tray, we're going to need a round or an oval piece. I didn't have any at my local Dollar Tree. This was in my stash, so I'm just going to roll with this. I want to do the iron-on method to the top of this piece, so I'm taking a lot of Mod Podge and applying it to all the sections of this round piece that I want it to attach to. If you want a nice crisp line around your edges where you separate the piece you're decoupaging, make sure to take your time and apply nice thick layers all around the edges. When your piece looks like this, set it off to the sides and let it dry for a couple hours naturally. For our decoupage portion, we're going to be using this beautiful decoupage tissue paper. Over on my Facebook page, I do have a TDS community group where we just share all things related to crafts and decoupage and TDS. I put out a little poll over there and asked them what section of this paper that they like the best, and the section we're going to decoupage on the top of this won. And for anyone wondering what is TDS, it stands for the DIY Struggle. It is my brand, and over on my website, thediystruggle.com, I have a decoupage paper line with over 40 designs for you to choose from, a transfer line, small rice paper print. A question I get asked a lot is if you can iron on tissue paper, and that is why I wanted to do this particular project, is to show you that you absolutely can. I want to save as much of this paper as possible, so I decided to just trace around the part that I wanted and I just cut that out. Now it's time for us to bring on in our iron. This little sucker usually sits right next to me at the craft table. It is not the exact iron that you have to use for projects like this, so please don't feel like this is the only iron. You can use whatever iron you would like. I do turn mine all the way up before I begin. You're going to want to make sure to grab you some parchment paper. This is going to help you apply your piece. It's going to protect your paper from getting any possible burn marks from the iron. It's also going to help reduce any ability for your iron to stick to your paper or to the project if there's Mod Podge around it. The parchment paper does a multitude of things. I also get asked very often, can you use wax paper? Wax paper is not heat resistant. Wax paper is mostly used to stop as like a non-stick surface. Parchment paper is heat resistant, so it does make a little bit of a difference. Now, I'm not saying I've never used wax paper in a pinch, but Parchment paper is what you're supposed to use. And one rule of thumb that I kind of try to follow whenever I'm doing this method is to pick a side and go from one side to the next. This will help prevent any bubbling up in the center. When you're all done, check around the edges to make sure everything's attached, and then get a little piece of sandpaper and go around sanding. I like to just go straight down with my sandpaper just in case anything isn't attached around the edge. We don't have any bunching and can fix that. Once your piece is completely dry, if you want to put some sealer over it, you go right ahead. Make sure you do little thin layers instead of going in heavy. It's going to help reduce wrinkles as it dries. Now it's time to assemble our piece. You can leave your basket in the shape that it is, but I wanted mine a little bubbly, and this stuff is easy to manipulate. So I just made mine look like this, and then I flipped it over on the bottom and grabbed the top of our tray and put it into place. I flipped it upside down and then grabbed this little wood piece. You could use whatever wood piece you want as long as it fits on top of our little industrial candle holder here. I'm using tacky glue and hot glue to be able to attach this to the metal basket and have something solid for our metal candle holder to attach to. You can skip this next part if you want to, but I wanted to add some fairy lights, at least for the staging purposes, and an extra idea because it looks so amazing. You can remove this obviously if you just tape it in here. Feel free to glue yours down. Take the idea and remix it into whatever works for your home decor. I absolutely just think this idea is so amazing. Look how awesome this looks. For this Mod Podge hack, we're going to be demonstrating by creating a little riser and blending the iron-on method to wood. I'm using the good old faithful matte Mod Podge here. And people, everyone is probably going to have their own opinion on the best way to iron on, and there's nothing wrong with that. We all need to use what works for us. Me personally, I like to take a lot of Mod Podge and slap it all over the sucker that I am about to iron on, and make sure it's a nice, healthy, juicy layer. And then we gotta wait for it to dry like 2 or 3 hours. And then it's time to bring in the iron. And people, feel free to use whatever iron works best for you. I use this little joint because most of the time it's sitting right next to me while I'm crafting. Here is the beautiful napkin that I picked out from my stash. Now, most of the time, and the reason why I said in the beginning, we're going to be blending it to wood is because we are not painting this. We're keeping it neutral. And a lot of people like to paint their backgrounds so this way that the white helps it pop. But I want to show you that sometimes you can take the iron-on method with a napkin, even if it has a white background, that has neutral tones, and make it look as though it's part of the wood grain and the wood, and you don't know where the wood ends and the design starts, and it's just simply stunning. Just make sure you get all the sneaky layers off, my friends, okay? You have to make sure that we are just doing this with the top decorative layer, or we're gonna have foof-ups, okay? We're gonna have foof-ups. We don't want that. So the best way to avoid that is to take a second. I like to tear the little corner. Usually it's really quick for me. It reveals them, and then I just separate it. Since the top is all dry with the Mod Podge, you grab your iron and you go on in. Psych! I'm just kidding. How many of you were about to attack me in the comments like, Brandy, you forgot the parchment paper? Guess what? Your girl didn't forget the parchment paper. Now it's time to bring on in the parchment paper. If you've never done the iron-on method before, parchment paper really helps to kind of separate the napkin from the iron. It allows you to be able to take the heat from the iron and press it right on top of this parchment paper and it really melts the napkin into the Mod Podge without burning the napkin, without ripping anything off of the napkin onto the iron. Sometimes things can melt to the iron as well as damage the design. Sometimes, depending on the inks of things, inks can run and bleed. Once you're happy with your placement, I like to work from one side to the next, and it's a good idea to make sure as you're doing this that your design is flat. Sometimes if you don't, you can get bumps and creases inside of your application. It really takes a couple seconds for that Mod Podge to melt right onto the napkin, and then just roll on with the rest of your project. Feel free to seal over this after it's dry. You can use whatever type of sealer. Do keep in mind that if you're going to put this in an area that's going to get wet, you want to make sure that you use a dishwasher safe topper, sealer, something that is safe with water. Now here I'm showing you how amazing this melts right on to our wood neutral backgrounds. If you have some little neutral pops, even on a white napkin, you can see the white napkin almost takes on the appearance of the wood grains. And please, people, make sure that this is completely ironed on all around your edges before you go sanding around to get the excess off. If it's not, you're gonna have some gaps around the edges and some fraying with your napkin. For this Mod Podge hack, we're going to make a mixed media mason jar lantern with a beautiful gloss over the top. First things first, get rid of the lid. We're not going to need it. Then grab your napkins, all the napkins, because we're going to need to look through the stash and find some prints that have colors that are kind of the same, but not the same, but share similar characteristics so it doesn't look too wild. You get where we're going with this. And on a side note, I want to share with you my super secret napkin piece that I have hidden. Look at this little Oreo gem. It's my precious. We're going to just stick it right back in there. And you guys never seen it. I may never use it, but now you know it's there. But we're never going to talk about it again. Okay, now moving on. You're going to take your napkins and you're going to get all the sneaky layers off because we only need the top layers, okay? And do this for as many napkins as you grabbed and then start tearing them suckers on up, just the little sections that you need, and put them over in a pile, and do it deliberately so this way you have designs that actually make sense. Like, don't do it sideways so this way a design isn't like a whole piece. You want to try and have something so this way, because it's a mixed media design, you want certain things to pop. You can have like a certain pattern that really you can do whatever the heck you guys want. But I'm just saying, for me, for this, I did specific designs and that's how I rolled with it, okay? We're going to use some Mod Podge. Then we're going to just take our little section that we tore and start in a spot. There's no right or wrong way to give this a go. Just plop it on down, and then against my normal recommendation, you're going to take your paintbrush and go right over the napkin, because you got to move quickly as you're doing this so your Mod Podge stays fairly wet at the ends of the little patches that you're placing. And then this is really key to where you tore your napkins, so this way you can line up the designs. If you have some little spaces, do not fret about that, because our overall gloss that we're going to pop over here will either seal that in, or you can do like I'm doing here and just take teeny tiny little patches to seal in certain holes. That's entirely up to you how you would like to do this. But I try to make sure each design was a whole section, so as you're looking at it, you could see a full design. I let this dry for several hours, and it's really pretty on its own, right? Just like this is nice and pretty. No, it's not. It's not pretty enough yet. We're gonna need to grab some mica powder, some silver, some white, pick one. Then a little bit of glossy Mod Podge, okay? A little tiny dollop. We don't need a lot of the mica powder, and yes, it needs to be this color. And it only needs to be a little bit, because if you put any more in there, it's going to turn into a paint and then you won't really be able to see through it very well. Just need a little tappity tap and then a lot of smushing, so this way it's all mixed together. Then we're going to grab a paintbrush and gently go over the entire piece. Don't go over too many sections once this dries, because then you will not be able to see the designs from the napkins. But if you do a nice thin layer, this is going to cover any glass that is still showing, any separation between the 2, 3, 4 different types of napkins you popped on here. It's going to be a stunning mixed media lantern. Had we have painted the mason jar white, we would not be able to have the lantern effect to be able to see through it with some lights. But what I love so much about the hack of using a little bit of glossy Mod Podge and a tiny bit of white or silver or mica powder is it creates just enough of a translucency and enough of a metallic sheen to tie in several different prints together and make them look like one unique creative art piece. I've been experimenting a lot with Mod Podge lately, thanks to a lot of your comments, by the way. And one of my favorite things I've learned is that we can create beautiful colored glass decor with a little bit of food coloring and some Mod Podge. One of my recent trips to Dollar Tree, I seen these beautiful pieces. The amount of Mod Podge and the amount of food coloring you're going to use is going to be entirely up to the size of the project that you're going to be doing. I only used 3 little dots of the food coloring here to get this pigment. And keep in mind, you might need to mix up another batch. This stuff does not sit well for long periods of time. It hardens really quick. It also dries really quick, so that's a good thing. Do clean your glass before you get started with any glass project. I used rubbing alcohol and just let that dry, and I'm using a soft paintbrush here to apply this. I'm making sure my strokes are fairly even, because we are going to be able to see them on our first coat especially, and if you leave any heavy spots, you're going to have clumps there and it looks a little tacky. So doing a second coat, at least at the minimum, it's going to make it look nicer. I would recommend 3 coats, but for the sake of the video, I just did 2, okay? And to keep in theme with the Dollar Tree one, I took some little, nautical gem keychain things that I had laying around from a purchase I made at Amazon and put them around the neck of our little glass piece. And people, I do know another way you can create this is by taking the food color and the Mod Podge and swirling it around the inside, heating it up in the oven. But I thought to myself, I wanted to use the inside of that glass for cotton balls or Q-tips or whatever. I didn't want that product on my piece, but I still wanted to get that same beautiful colored look. And I thought this was a great idea. Try more. A recent trip to Dollar Tree, I grabbed these foil flakes in all 3 colors because I have no self-control, but because I have no faith in them, I also ordered some gold foil off of Amazon. What are we doing, Brandy? What's the hack? Well, recently on TikTok, I know TikTok's got all the goodies, I seen somebody using Mod Podge to attach gold foil, and I was like, oh, we gonna try this. Truth be told, I have really never used gold foil, especially not like this. And I know that they have that adhesive glue, but I've seen enough furniture artists do enough beautiful projects with it, so I had some expectations. Not extremely high though, because the TikTok video did share that you have to apply the foil as the Mod Podge is drying. It's like in a tacky stage. I don't know if you've ever stared at Mod Podge like I do, but it has stages. Really wet, kind of dry, then it's kind of tacky, and then you think it's dry, but there's still some wet spots. It goes through stages. This stuff is super thin. I mean, super thin. It was so easily like disintegrating in my hand. So I felt like this was at a good point that I could just start pressing and tappity tap 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 in it right on the outside of the letters. I purchased these for me because someday I'm gonna have a nice little background behind me, and this is the R and the S in the DIY struggle, and I wanted different lettering, so I thought gold would look really cool on the outside of one, and then we would have the 3 colors on the outside of the other, just in case you guys are wondering, what is the R and the S about, Brandy? As you can see, this is easy enough, right? I didn't paint a whole section with the Mod Podge, just a little section. But I can tell you, if it dries, it is not tacky at all. And like right here, that side had already dried. It was not sticking. And then see how it's wet? It almost melts the gold foil. So it definitely matters that as you're applying this, that the Mod Podge is at that tacky stage. So small sections and then, you know, move on. I decided to take this out back on my patio to get the extra foil off, and I know I didn't have the proper brush that they recommend, so I just had a chippy brush, a really soft chippy brush laying around, and figured we're going to do this. And let me tell you something. This stuff is... woo, it is messy. Like, there are glittery bits all over my patio. I wasn't sure where to get started brushing the pieces off. And then I was like, it's snowing. And as I'm standing there trying to get the gold off, I'm so mesmerized by the flakes. And I felt like I was in a giant snow globe. Anyhow, the point is, make sure you are in an area that you either don't care that you get this stuff all over the place, or you're outside to make sure that it's not getting all over your house. One thing I do know from watching Katja, if you guys are not familiar with her, she's a furniture artist. When you use this foil and the glue, it is beautiful. It's flawless. This, however, I noticed was having cracks all in it, which honestly, I don't mind. I love that kind of stuff. This turned out perfect for me, to be honest with you. I will absolutely be doing this going forward, using the Mod Podge, using the flakes. There's going to be DIYs. I'm going to be popping this in, so I know my patio gets used to looking like a snow globe because I'm so here for it. So me being me and having to give y'all options, I'm like, we're going to also try this with these foil flakes from Dollar Tree. And I'm like, it has to be easier because they're bits. You know what I'm saying? Like, they're little bits. I can just pop them on the Mod Podge as it's drying. Right? Wrong. First of all, I can tell you the feeling of these is definitely different from the foil from Amazon. You know what it feels like? Bubblegum wrappers. Little rolled up bubblegum wrappers. Despite my best effort with this situation, it did not matter if it was tacky or not. These foils were struggling to stay in place. And when they were, since I guess they're like bits of foils or flakes, the flakes were kind of thick in certain sections from where, you know, they felt like balled up pieces of bubblegum wrappers. They were thicker, so I started just taking some of the Mod Podge and going over top a couple of them to see if that would hold them down. And honestly, after about 15 to 20 minutes of mucking with this, I was like, you know what? This hack with the Dollar Tree flakes is just not working. However, the Mod Podge hack to use with the gold flakes is absolutely stunning and gives a beautiful, beautiful vintage crackle look, and I love it. Absolutely love giving you creative ideas to turn books into beautiful pieces of decor, but sometimes y'all give me some slack about it. Even though I have shared that over 300 million books get tossed into our landfills each year, so upcycling them, crafters, is actually help save our environment. With all that being said, I aim to please, and I love giving y'all options, so we're gonna take this piece of wood and turn it into a beautiful piece of book decor. fake book decor that is. We're going to start off by needing a piece of decorative trim for our spine, and I popped over Home Depot, I say Depot, you guys call it whatever you want. In this little section here, you can get little decorative pieces of trim, and they're really inexpensive. So I'm going to take a piece and just chop it down to size, and to do that, we're going to need to bring on in the miter shears. I mean, really, use whatever you would like to cut yours down. This is what I'm going to use. We're also going to be using a wood applique. You can pick these up off Amazon. You can pick them up at Lowe's, Home Depot, Hobby Lobby. These in particular on my website. And I'm just going to cut it down into little sections so I get 3 pieces to be able to put on our Faux book. And if you don't want to use a wood applique, you can use molds, whatever you would like. Take the idea and remix it. To attach all of our pieces, I'm going to be using Titebond's Quick and Thick. Feel free to use whatever you would like. On wood, I usually like to use either tacky glue or wood glue, or this is like my new go-to stuff. A smear just a little bit all over our wood pieces and then put them into place on the spine of our book. Now for the front of our book, we're going to create a little frame using a piece of rice paper. Use whatever you would like for this idea. I'm going to take this little steampunk piece, inspired me a bit. I've been wanting to use this. I truly love every little design on this sheet of my TDS rice paper, but I wanted to use this balloon one. Now I had another piece of trim from Home Depot, and I'm just going to cut that down, making 45-degree cuts. So this way it all fits together perfectly around that top wood applique piece. If you don't want to frame your piece like this, use molds, use whatever works best for you. Now we have to create that background for a decoupage piece, so I'm just going to take a little bit of white chalk paint and set a base down. And for our main color, I'm just going to take some black chalk paint and cover the entire rest of our book. Once I had the parts of the book painted that I wanted, I allowed this to dry and then came on in with my TDS artist brushes. These are in the fan style. They are perfect for decoupage, and I'm going to use them to apply this rice paper in the section where we painted that white paint. This allows our design to pop, and it also helps us to be able to create different colors. How we have the black, you could absolutely paint this whatever color you want, but the white behind whatever you're decoupaging really allows for the design and your napkin, your tissue paper, whatever, to really show through. Now this rice paper works really well if you spritz a little water on the back after you've added your medium on there. Helps reduce your wrinkles. Works so well just to take my fingers and flatten it right out. While that little section was drying, I grabbed my Folk Art metallic paints and applied a layer on top of our trim pieces and did a little dusting over the spine of our book. I added some of my Titebond Quick and Thick to the back of these little trim pieces and then applied them around our piece for our frame. I decided to grab some spackling and put right in the corners, so this way we didn't have such gaps where the frame didn't exactly meet. This didn't take very long to dry, and when it did, I grabbed my little finger sander and just took that excess off and then painted up the trim. At this point, the trimmings are entirely up to you. To mimic book pages, I took some antique Waverly wax and carefully colored that in, trimmed everything up so it looked really nice. Did a light dusting with our black paint around the frame, and then I added some gears. For this set of apothecary jars, we're going to use a love potion label and a poison label. And some small little wine bottles. But before we put our labels on, we're going to get artsy fartsy with some Dollar Tree gauze, tacky glue, and water. I'm sorry. No, not really. I feel like y'all need to experience the crafting ASMR I deal with. I added some water to that mixture, and then I put down some wax paper to protect my surface because it's gonna get messy. I'm taking a little bit of this black malty surface paint and mixing it in with the tacky glue and the water, so this way it dyes our Dollar Tree gauze. You can use a bunch of things for this. You could use burlap, you could use fabric, you could use tissues or napkins, but gauze is one of my favorites. It also hardens really well. Gauze also absorbs color really well. Look at that, people. It is just melted into there. When this dries, it's going to be absolutely fabulous. We're going to take the gauze and just wrap it around the top. It's also easy to manipulate and spread around. You could use tissues, you could use paper towels, you could use cloth for this as well, or fabric, but gauze for me, I think, is just going to get the look that I'm going for, creating these old musty bottles. Look at that. Looks awesome, right? Unfortunately, we're gonna have to let these suckers dry overnight. That is the worst part about doing things like that, is the dreaded dry time. Just take your time wrapping your bottles up with this stuff. Get it exactly where you want it. I did the same thing for the second bottle. I just put the gauze in a different pattern, and I also wrapped the bottom of these bottles as well and left them to dry. I want to make a nice texture paint to go around these bottles, so I'm going to take my calcium carbonate and baking soda, and no, I'm not measuring. I don't have a measurement for you, okay? Just, measure with love. Sprinkle, add your paints, okay? And I did put a smidge of tacky glue in here to make sure that it kind of holds down our gauze into place as we tappity tap 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 this mixture onto here. You want it nice and buttery smooth. You can absolutely add more baking soda to get a little bit grittier. It's completely up to you. I'm using a pouncer just to tap this medium all over the place, except for the part where we're going to decoupage. That I just took some of our black chalk paint and used in just that section. This way we don't have the texture preventing us from having a nice decoupage label on the front here. See how we can see the division from the texture to the flat black paint? I'll show you how we'll blend it all in a minute. The goal for the top was to take this metallic paint and add to the corks and then glue these beautiful glass knobs from Dollar Tree right onto those. Unfortunately, after I went through the painstaking process of painting all of these and getting it all ready, one thing I didn't account for is this is actually glued in here. Dollar Tree actually glued it in. I thought I was going to be able to just kind of twist it out, because you can do that with a lot of Hobby Lobby's knobs, but we can't. And I really want it to have this gold or rose color underneath, so I'm gonna just kind of paint that and then glue this in here. We just won't have a removable top because I really want the top to have these. But you know what? I made it work, okay? It still gave me the same look I was going for, just painting the top of the little wine bottles. I'm just using some Mod Podge for our decoupage medium. Feel free to use whatever you would like. I did cut these labels exactly down to size to go into the sections that I wanted. And then I just used my finger to gingerly move them along and press them down. Once they were dry, I grabbed some of that medium, and to blend everything together, I just tappity tap 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 all around the label. I grabbed some of my Gorilla Glue gel and put around the rims to attach our little glass knobs, and these are stunning. I even took some more of that metallic and rubbed along the texture and along the gauze to give it that dingy appearance. Don't ever feel like you have to go outside and grab real dirt to get that look. You can create that by using normal craft supplies or baking soda and things like that around your home. Let's start with a wood applique. Now, make sure your wood applique does have a flat surface, or flat-ish, and this one's pretty large. It's about 8 inches. We're then going to take some white paint and put a nice base on here. I'm using chalk paint. Feel free to use whatever white paint you would like. This is going to help our decoupage to pop. For the decoupage portion, we're going to be using my own TDS Creative Decoupage tissue paper. This is called Nature in Winter. I'm just going to cut out this little section and trim it down to size to fit that center of our wood applique. And to get that exact design, I'm just taking my nail and digging it on in that crease and then trimming it out with a pair of scissors. For medium, I'm just gonna take some good old Mod Podge and one of my TDS Creative artist brushes in the fan style for our application process. Now, you don't need a lot of medium whenever you're using this tissue paper. A little will do, but if you do use too much, it's fair to say it's going to squeeze out around the edges and you can just wipe it right on off. Now, I do like to take a little bit of water from my water bottle and give it a little spritzy spritz on the back of the tissue paper. It just helps make it a little bit more manipulatable for you to press it down and get a good connection. You do not have to spray this with the water bottle if you do not want. You can absolutely apply the tissue paper dry and still get an amazing finish. The good thing about using tissue paper is if you mess up, like how I laid it down here and it wasn't exactly in the center, you can use your fingers and gently move it around. Once that was dry, I grabbed some of my antique Waverly wax and a baby wipe. You could use your finger. You see me use my finger here too. Use whatever you want, people. We're just taking some, going around the edges of our ornament and rusticking it on up, you know, helping those beautiful ornate designs to pop on this piece. Then I decided to take a little tiny paintbrush with some of the same white paint we put our base on and go around, just, you know, trimming it up, making sure that that decoupage looks nice. And I did take a little extra of that white around the edges, doing a little dry brush over the antique Waverly wax. And to finish it up, I'm going to take some of this Super Gloss by Mod Podge. Now, for those of you that are like me and are not familiar with resin, but you want that extra kick to your piece, check out how amazing this looks. And mind the fact that I'm using a teeny tiny tray, okay? Yes, this ornament would absolutely look better on a much bigger tray, but for display purposes, you get the idea. If you're looking for more creative DIY projects, check out this video right here. And if you're interested in checking out any of the TDS creative products used in this video, check out the DIYstruggle.com. As always, people, thank you all so much for hanging out with me today, and until next time.